Brill. Thank you very much for that introduction. She just actually described as looking like a boy band with these things on, which is quite a compliment, really.
From 1987.
So, my name is Dave Bunting. I work at Leeds Beckett University in the outdoor department, which is Carnegie Great Outdoors. And I'm also the head of training and development for the Battleback Centre, which is a Royal British Legion centre in Shropshire.
My role is to understand the lasting influence of any and all of the outdoor and adventurous related recovery support programs that the university is involved in providing. The bulk of that revolves around recovery support for people involved in the military, but it also spans a number of different regions. So Dave's the doer and I'm the researcher in a nutshell.
Intellect, common sense. What are you sitting down for? You're not finished.
Because it's your bit now.
So, how to do an expedition like this. What we're going to do is tell you the story of our expedition, and hopefully there's some little bits that you'll pick up on along the way about we went about it. Just to give you a little bit of background, the university have been into expeditions for quite a while, and it started with this expedition, and I was the leader of this expedition to the west ridge of Mount Everest in 2006. We didn't get to the top, and I've spent most of my time since then being remembered for somebody that didn't do something. That's what I'm best known for. But that expedition triggered off a real enthusiasm in the university for expeditions, and we connect with various people doing expeditions and organisations, ran some expeditions ourselves, the Gurkhas on Everest and so on. And of course, there was always an educational and research angle to what we're doing at the university. And for those that don't know, which is probably most of you, we've now got a £45 million new build at Leeds Beckett, and it's going to be lined up for working with elite sports people, including expeditions and so on. I think we've got some of the best environmental chambers in the country in that new build. But we got heavily into being enthusiastic about expeditions and the learning that can be taken from expeditions. And of course, me working in the outdoor department with my colleagues, we wanted to get people into the outdoors, inspire them and take them on more extended journeys on expeditions. We even wrote a book. If you want to get hold of that book, good luck. It was so niche that it doesn't sell anymore, and I think I owe them money for the book, not the other way around. But that was a bit of a culmination of expeditions we've been involved in. That was a quite hard graft to do. I mentioned Carnegie Great Outdoors. We're a provider of outdoor activities, education, leadership and team development, working with, I think this is one of our greatest strengths, we work with a really wide variety of organisations, charities, schools, universities. Obviously the Royal British Legion and the Battleback Centre has been one of our biggest pieces of work and a great success over the last 12 years.
The Mission Himalaya expedition that we're going to talk about is not a standalone experience that we've been involved in. It has stemmed from the work that goes on at this place, the Battleback Centre, which has been mentioned already. Key to what Helen said earlier this afternoon is that if you solely provide these hugely expensive, shiny experiences, that is not sort of adhering to your doorstep effect, by which you're able to introduce people to have the ability to engage in outdoor and adventurous activities in a way that can benefit them and their circumstances. So we want to tell you a little bit about where the expedition stemmed from. So the Battleback Centre has been running for over 10 years now, and through a partnership with the key stakeholders of Leeds Beckett University, the Royal British Legion and the Ministry of Defence, recovery support programs that utilise outdoor and adventurous activities have been provided for people who are wounded, injured and sick with mental health problems or systemic illnesses. Now, this has been going on, as I say, for 10 years, and what's also been going on for 10 years is research work into the effectiveness and the lasting impact of those experiences. So those experiences are a 5-day residential program at the Battleback Centre, and the participants will take part in a number of appropriate adaptive sport and adventurous activities and sport. Now, the way in which the research work has sort of worked its way into this, it's a wonderful example of evidence-based and informed practice. So, for example, 10 years ago, the program was designed, developed with these three key stakeholders. And in part because of the evidence that was provided to show the impact of the experiences for those people in recovery, it's no longer just an option. So if you're a recovery support officer in the military, you might have at one stage suggested that I think, Joe, Steve and Debbie, I think they'd really click with what's going on here. Thankfully now, because of the evidence that's been provided to show the black and white benefit of participating in these courses, it's now part and parcel of the recovery pathway of the Royal Air Force and the Army. So when conversations have gone on throughout the day about research running alongside delivery and then informing policy, this is a fantastic example of that. So this is where the project stemmed, this is where this expedition stemmed from. And it's a fantastic example of what's been described as a cornerstone activity in participants' recovery. Now, fast forward then to 2018, the British Legion have the desire to run a project out of this experience and evidence its impact in the same way. So this is where we're then going to talk to you about how we wanted to bring work from the sort of day-to-day running of using outdoor and adventurous activities as a concept, as a context for personal growth and recovery to help people in what is inevitably often a very lengthy recovery process. Nobody claims to wave a magic wand and fix people's circumstances by spending 5 days at the centre, but it's evidenced in a multitude of peer-reviewed journals, independent reviews, independent assessments of the impact, and so now Dave's going to mention about how this has stemmed on to the mission Himalaya.
So before we went on to Mission Himalaya, back in about 2013, we started to consider dipping our toe into the expedition world from Battleback. And so in 2014, we pulled together an expedition to go off to South America. And within the Battleback team, we had quite a lot of people who had expedition experience because we'd been involved in recruitment, and we thought those sorts of people are the people we want in our team. And so we pulled this expedition together, and that was going to be just a small expedition, just 3 Battlebackers on the expedition, along with 3 members of Parliament. There are some members of Parliament right now I'd love to take on expedition. And we, working with Jagged Globe, headed off to South America, and we had lined up 5 peaks. Actually, because of the MPs, we had to go in a slightly different season to normal, so we didn't get great weather, but we got up most of the peaks, and the final peak that we were aiming for was Cotopaxi, which was 15 hours up and down inside a cloud, never saw anything at all. So we might as well have been on the Cairngorms, but it was still a brilliant experience for the people involved. And the MPs were actually on board to raise the profile of the work at Battleback, which was fantastic, what they did on their social media sites and so on. Now, in terms of expeditions, I mean, obviously I'm a huge fan of expeditions, and just a couple of things that, that I believe are important about expeditions. They bring people together, and in terms of Battleback, those people that can come together, that have shared experiences from being in the military and having challenges in their own lives and so on, that was really powerful in terms of both of these expeditions. One of the things I love about expeditions, it's a real environment where things can really go wrong, and you've got to deal with them, especially if it's a remote expedition. An extended journey, being able to set out, and when we went to Cotopaxi, it was a brilliant expedition, but we got bussed between the sort of main places, then walked up in the mountain and came back down again. with Mission Himalaya and any expedition in the Himalayas, you're setting off together from either an airport or a roadhead or whatever into the middle of nowhere on an extended journey. And I absolutely love that, to be off into the remote wilderness. Or maybe it isn't remote wilderness. Everest Base Camp, for example, now it's still a fantastic journey where you're dealing with your issues along the way. And what I love about it as well, every time I think about going on an expedition, I just think simplicity. I think that little rucksack on my back with my flask and my camera, no technology, none of the normal life to worry about. And so that's a really important part of it, going on expeditions. Inspiration. Obviously, there's inspiration in any mountains you go to, but for me, nowhere touches Nepal. Nepal is absolutely fantastic. And talking about inspiration on Mission Himalaya, I have this little image in my mind of being in a tea house in the middle of the area we went to, and there's a couple of guys in our team playing guitars and singing in the tea house, and on one side of them, 8 times Everest summiteer Sherpa, 5 times Everest summiteer Sherpa on the other side of them. That's special for anybody to be involved in. But Nepal, for those that have been there, who has been to Nepal? Yeah, as I expected, quite a few of you. Brilliant, brilliant place. It's an inspirational place. The people are amazing. The place is amazing. Now, in terms of headspace, this is what's really big about an expedition for me. That ability, as I just mentioned a moment ago, about getting away from normal life and being able to get into somewhere where you can deeply reflect on anything that's going on in your life is what expeditions is fantastic for. For anybody as old as me, my mate used to describe it as disk defragmentation of the brain. For anybody that understood that from computer days, and that's what it is. Put everything aside and just focus on what you want to focus on. Of course, all expeditions are going to focus on health and well-being, because to have the best expedition you can, that's an important factor when you're going on expeditions. Finally, their sense of achievement. And, for people we're taking on an expedition, they've had their confidence knocked in multiple ways. So together to come back and do something and gain that sense of achievement is going to build their confidence on a major level. One that I haven't got on there is learning new skills, which you're inevitably going to do on expeditions. And of course, that will reinvigorate your learning. And that, being a new learner is brilliant for anybody. Now, this expedition, off on Mission Himalaya expedition, this was, from a Royal British Legion perspective, a really important step, because the other expedition had been quite low-key, and this was going to be something they really wanted to put out there. Now, it was going to celebrate 100 years from the end of the First World War. So it was that centenary they were celebrating. As before, we wanted to raise the profile of the work that's going on at Battleback. So it's quite a lot of media attention. We got in with Sky News and so on. And so that helped raise that profile. But as Chris will talk about, it was also, in terms of a lot of his research has been on the programme going on at Lillishall at the Battleback Centre. Well, this was going to be the first time we're going to be doing research on a more extended journey to see what it was like to work with a group of people over a 30-day expedition and over a year and a half of preparation for that as well. Of course, well-being is a really big focus for the British Legion again on this expedition. Now, when we put this out there, we hadn't actually decided, that's why we called it Himalayan Expedition. We hadn't decided what peak we were going to do, because it's pointless advertising a peak and then ending up with a load of people that aren't capable of that peak. So we put out there, we're going to go to the Himalayas. And once we then got into it, we then decided what we're going to do. So we had in our mind a couple of peaks, we had in our mind a particular trek, but we were going into it flexible to be able to react to all of that. On the selection for the expedition, we all gathered at the Battleback Centre. We advertised it. We advertised it in the Battleback community for this expedition. And so there's all the people that came to the weekend. And we held a pretty detailed weekend. So we got mental health nurse there, we got a doctor there, we got the officer commander of the Battleback Centre involved, the British Legion, all of the expedition leaders, some Battleback coaches who had specialist technical advisor skills. So we had quite a lengthy weekend to do the initial selection. From that, we selected what we call the squad of people that then got involved in the training. And that training took place in Scotland, North Wales, and the Lake District. So we did a few skills things in those areas we went to. Of course, we're not going to be doing anything too extreme on the expedition, but we want to do a few mountaineering skills. It's in North Wales there. And, you know, we basically went off to these areas to bond the team, have a better look at the squad we'd got, and also, to a degree, put people through their paces. Because I had previously been on an expedition to Everest Base Camp, and actually reflected back on that one where we hadn't put people through their paces as much as we should have done. And so with this, we did have a fitness sort of weekend, or mountain fitness weekend, in North Wales. Now, it wasn't running up any mountains, but we set a fairly extended day, so people proved to us they could go up and down mountains for, you know, 6 or 8 hours. I mean, it was a very steady pace like you do in the Himalayas, but it was an important factor to prepare for the expedition. Now, when we're selecting these people, what was really different to normal is that, you know, often you go on an expedition, you select people you want to take with you, and people that normally perform well to be on an expedition. With these people going on this expedition, they're actually people you wouldn't normally select. You know, there was a lot of challenges going on in their lives, a lot of mental health issues, you know, and a lot of long conversations we had as a selection team where we're weighing up the risk of taking that person over the benefits that person could gain from an expedition like this. So it's quite a challenging selection process. And of course, we're going to go for 30 days in the middle of nowhere. We've got to understand how they're going to work together as well. So listening to how each person was getting on before we did the final selection was really, really important. And we ended up on our last training session in the Lake District. Now, for me, the big one with an expedition like, well, normally any expedition, but this one was like on steroids in terms of detail. You know, we had to really concentrate massively on what we're going to do with this expedition to make it successful for the British Legion. So we had a project board with the British Legion. So myself, one of my colleagues would meet with the British Legion on about a monthly basis and talk through the finances, talk through what was happening, talk through the team we're selecting, which is really important. The finances were massively important. So the British Legion were incredible when it came down to this. Probably the biggest piece of advice I took to the Legion was, if we're going to run this expedition, we need to pay for everything. And that was, you know, from my previous expeditions, you know, when you're on, you know, 2016, I remember going to the Himalayas, went to Boots in Yorkshire, 90 quid later, walked out with my first aid kit. You know, you go into Cotswold camping, you walk out 15 quid later, pair of socks. You know, it can build up massively the cost of an expedition, particularly if, like this, that they aren't mountaineers, aren't outdoor people. So I said to Legion, we need to pay for everything. And that included equipment, water in Kathmandu, all the food in Kathmandu, travel to the airport, everything, you know, was included. And of course, we learned as we went along, and the British Legion were very supportive of that. So I mentioned finances, kit was the other thing. You know, lots of them had absolutely nothing to go on a trip like this. And so we worked with Andrew Denton, who probably many of you will know, amazing guy, amazingly supportive, and very well connected to a lot of big organisations, and so that was fantastic to have on the expedition. So it's really important we got that support to go on this experience. Final one for the British Legion is we held a high risk and remote cover for this expedition. So we went in front of a panel and told them all of our plans, from the mountain to the travel to who we're taking, what leaders are involved, what altitudes we're going to work at. That was extremely important for the MOD and British Legion. And it's good generally on an expedition to have somebody, a third party, question you on your plans. I think that's a really, really good thing to do. And recently we've done that for a friend, you know, put him in front of a little panel because he's doing this big cycling event to say, tell us how you're going to do it. And you can massively learn from that. Now, after all the selection went on, we ended up at our launch event in London just before we set out. You see the celebrity in the middle there. from tipping point. But the British Legion wanted to have a celebrity involved to, again, help raise the profile of the expedition. Before we then set off, for those that don't know, to the area just near the Everest region, the Makalu-Barun area of the Himalayas, which is where the expedition took place.
So now we've got a group of people that you wouldn't normally choose, apparently, that are living with circumstances that are similar to some of the stuff that Helen presented earlier on in terms of living with anxiety, things that they would normally avoid, circumstances that they would normally avoid, disturbed sleep, physical exertion, hypoxia. That's all the things that they would try and avoid. What are we going to do? We're going to go to a high altitude realm that might well kind of push and stretch and bend that comfort, stretch and panic zone. So the first, after all that kind of, razzmatazz of the media launches and the selection and so on and so forth, getting to Kathmandu and just kind of hitting pause was more useful than ever, I think. So it's really useful, I would advise, for any trip to Nepal, if you're going to be spending time out in the mountains, is to kind of, decompress from the West and ingrain yourself in the East a little bit. Now, that then allows those additional explanations. Some of it is literal as those additional explanations of, so I'm trying to provide advice so that you can kind of consider it in your own circumstances, your own well-being involvement that you have, is if we are going to work with the people with the most to gain, not necessarily the most in need, because that's a very different circumstance. The selection was an incredible challenge for Dave in working in this environment where we're gonna choose people that we think have got a huge amount to gain and can gain from this experience. But managing their time just in Kathmandu it's a sensory overload for anybody. Some of these individuals very, very nearly didn't even make it out of their front door to get to the airport to fly over to Nepal with us. So just taking some of those additional considerations into account is absolutely crucial. It allows us to just kind of relax and settle into what may be coming up so that we can fill our participants' minds with correct information, because many of them will be dealing with the uncomfortable aspect of uncertainty, again, which was touched on earlier on. This is already one of the most terrifying airports in the world for most people. Many people, myself included, are not that keen on being crammed in a minibus with wings and setting off into the side of a mountain. So we then kind of take quite a step back, really, when we're thinking about practically what are you actually doing on these trips and on these experiences, is adjusting and reacting to the circumstances that your participants sort of project. Now, I was lucky enough to convince the funders that the gold standard research process that we think you could apply to this expedition is to have a researcher on the expedition. So I've already spoken to some of you today who have spoken about the demands that you already have to provide a potentially impactful experience for people. And then now all of a sudden you might need to take on board the burden of understanding how to research it and try and research it yourselves. We've spoken with a lot of people that have done expeditions all around the world as participants, and they've been given a clicker and told not to drop it. They've been given a journal or something and asked to do it themselves. And the reality is, what we found is that people don't do the work when it comes to understanding well-being, and it's the first thing that gets dropped. So if people have got to write down what food they ate that day, but then they've also got to talk about what they were feeling and thinking, they'll drop the emotional stuff before they then drop the maybe some of the physiological data. So my role was to understand for each individual what does success mean for them. it's already been spoken about that success means different things to different people, and there is no kind of one size fits all for taking a group of individuals who've all got their own circumstances, they've all got their own experiences, they've all got their own standards for what success might mean for them. So it's my job to get to know them in the lead up to the expedition. And again, when we come back to the practicalities of it, it's conducting recorded interviews with the participants and banking that data. And you'll, as the talk goes on, you'll understand how far that's gone. And then we just kind of literally settle in. It's really important to not just entirely rely on the passive benefits of spending time in the outdoors, but also you can overdo it if you start on day 2. So how's it, what do you think this is going to do for you in 3 weeks time, in 10 months time? So this sort of early stage was settling in, really. It was having conversations. It was, for me and the staff, it allows time to strengthen that rapport, because now it's just us. It's just us on the trail, and heading out into some wonderful scenery, and allowing some of those passive things that I don't need to point out that that's really or inspiring, or that's really overwhelming. This is where we can allow that to start settling in, and sort of nature to take its course. What's critical to note at this point is that every single one of the expedition participants expressed dissatisfaction with one or more of the 3 main elements of basic psychological needs, which some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not. They are autonomy, the ability to have control and make decisions over what goes on in our life. Many people that have been wounded, injured, or sick within the military have had a huge amount of autonomy taken away from them, and the decision-making process is altered for them. Relatedness is about our relationship with the people around us, and the relationship with ourselves and our environment. And competence, the ability to feel good about something that we do, whether it's being a parent or being a mountaineer or working. Each of the individual participants all express dissatisfaction in either of those 3 elements. And we know that if these 3 elements are knocked out of a line and challenged, that can have a negative effect on our mental well-being. This is where we start to then, I start to take note on what's happening and start having sort of conversations with people to understand their expectations and a little bit of where they're coming from, so to speak. So a lot of that is quite passive, and it's natural. It happens. You're out on the trail. We've been out with these people for like 6 months now. So that integration of research, I think, is critical. There's nothing worse, I don't think, than that sort of fly on the wall. All right, here's your instructor. Here's what you're going to be doing. This is the activity you're doing. Or this sore thumb over here is going to try and develop a relationship with you and understand what that might mean for you. So integration of research, where possible, I think is really, really impactful.
And one of my big jobs, really, with the expedition was making sure I had the right staff around me to support me, to then support the participants on the expedition. And as you might expect, we looked to our battleback team over at Lillishall in Shropshire, to people who've worked on that project for over 10 years, and lots of outdoor instructors, lots of experience in mountaineering, and it was really important we chose from that group, because their understanding of what we do, all that Chris has talked about, is essential for an expedition like this. They've got ability to deal with mental health issues, and just very experienced at dealing with those sorts of things that go on at Battleback. What I also needed, because we were going out to the Himalayas, needed a strong level of experience in expeditions, and because by this time now we'd started to identify what mountain we're going to do, so we're aiming for Mira Peak. So initially we'd had the idea we of 2 peaks, Mira Peak and a mountain called Burunsi. As it panned out, Burunsi, which is going to be for people that were probably a little bit more than just standard mountaineers or novices, ended up being a bit too much for the audience we had, and we couldn't really justify going to Mira Peak, then going around to Burunsi while 2 people climbed it and spent thousands of pounds worth of money on climbing Brunty. So we sacked off Brunty and focused on Mira Peak because that was a more rounded experience for the people that had been selected onto the expedition. But we needed people. Has anybody climbed Mira Peak? There's somebody at the back there done Mira. Mira is a very well-known peak, and when we set off there, I'm gathering all the information, talking to friends about Mira Peak, and it's 6,500 meters above sea level. And so the team that you're selecting to go and do something like that straight away for me need to have 6,500 meter experience. So when I'm looking at my leadership team, that's the sort of experience I want to have within the team. So I know that all that mountaineering, being in that sort of environment and the altitude is second nature to that person. They can put that all behind them and focus on the battle backers and the experience, and make sure for the British Legion that we're looking after the people that they're trusting us to look after. So that was really important. When I talk about the staff, I'm talking about the technical leaders. I'm talking about our researcher as well, because I don't want the researcher to be, need to be dragged along and looked after as well. Our doctor was an experienced mountaineer, so everybody's sort of double hatting on things like that, and that was really important. The other thing about the leaders as well is these were on another level, the people who took on this expedition. They were people who had absolutely no ego whatsoever. And that's really, really important to me. I remember running an expedition not long ago, well, the one at the beginning, Everest, West Ridge, and somebody sent me an application form that said they considered themselves the best climber in the British Army. I ripped that application up and threw it in the bin. I just don't like ego, particularly for a trip like this. It's really, really important. These leaders that come in with us don't care much about themselves. They want to give these people an awesome experience, and that's really important. And I remember when we did the launch event in London, one of the leaders, we had the launch event, and about 11 o'clock at night, we had somebody on the expedition who had previous drinking problems, who became uncomfortable at the late night of the launch. One of the leaders said to me, I'm going to walk him back to the hotel, and off they went, an hour's walk across London, late at night to take that guy out of that situation. He didn't feel that comfortable with it. That's the sort of leaders you want on the expedition. And that was really, really important. Now, on the expedition, we had 13 participants and 7 staff, including the doctor, researcher, a member of the British Legion. So it's quite high ratios, and within those ratios we created small groups of people, which we call coaching groups, that Chris can go on to talk about. And it wasn't just about coaching, it was about caring for a smaller ratio of people within that environment. The other big thing for me is my organisation insisted on it, the university and the British Legion, is we needed to layer the leadership so that if something happened to me as the leader, I had this vision of me being put on a helicopter ill, and I'd fly off. Myself, the university, the British Legion needed to be happy that whoever I left behind in charge was going to be able to make all the same decisions I would have made. And we had that layered down, not just to the deputy leader, but the person below that as well. So we had lots of backup in the system, because on previous expedition out there, I was the leader, got a chest infection, written off, and I was in absolute bits. And I learned a big lesson from that you need to have those layers in place to support that. The other thing is that when you're doing a trip like this, mention the research and Chris being involved on the expedition, that was really, really important, going out there to have the research embedded in the expedition. And what I mean by that is keeping the technical leaders, myself, out of the research, and having someone like Chris that's his job on the expedition, and he can focus completely on that. Also, during this phase, we wanted to get the expedition into good routine on this phase. And so, to keep on top of things that were going on, of course, we had the acclimatization and hydration police going on to make sure nobody walked too fast because of the altitude. Everybody was drinking properly to acclimatize, but also every day we'd gather to talk as leaders about how people were getting on, do a risk assessment every single day to discuss who needed to be looked after a bit more than others, and so on. And that all fed back into the big plan.
So if we're not going to rely on just spending time in Nepal on a trek, what are we going to do? And how might an active and critical phrase, intentional design be acted out on an expedition? So once we have started kind of gotten the ball rolling, so to speak, everybody's in the routines that Dave mentioned, and we've learned by having conversations with people about understanding what they need in certain circumstances. So we will ask people, what are you expecting to cause you problems? We can't foresee everything. We've not got a magic ball. But when things do become challenging for you, socially, emotionally, physically, what's going to work best for you? And some of this might have just never kind of needed to come about. You know, you all pack your first aid kit and you spend a lot of time carrying it around, and often, thankfully, it never comes out of your bag. But having that planning and understanding is really useful. And the conversations have to be considered. We felt it had to be considered to fit in with what you're planning on doing. So you can't have a route march of a route where there's no time for conversation, there's no time for meaningful engagement. So you need downtime, you need rest days. And that's a massive bonus when you're taking inexperienced mountaineers to 6,500 meters anyway. So in terms of that kind of route that Dave mentioned, it was a real kind of gold standard, you know, the long way round to get to Mira. If you go and do Mira with an organization, you'll be in and out in a few days flat. So building in that extra time allowed us to build in the active sort of component of the experience. Which I think is summed up really beautifully in this image. So at the Battleback Centre, we've got physical activities going on. Many of them revolve around adventurous contexts, but they are just a context. Many of you use the outdoor and adventurous environment as a context for personal growth, recovery, development, for people to understand more about themselves, about their capabilities, their abilities, their malleability to be able to deal with things going forward, specifically when we're working with people that are adjusting to life-changing circumstances. And we operate in what we refer to as a subclinical environment. So our staff at the Battleback Centre and the staff that came on the expedition are not clinicians. So they're working there are lots of different ways in which you can interact with people and work to help them. Mentoring, coaching, counselling, psychiatry, etc. The staff that work at the Battleback Centre and that were working on the expedition operate in that realm of health coaching. Now, many of you might be very familiar with it. It's a hugely kind of complex realm, this interplay of interactions that people can have with each other. But a sentence that I find useful to explain health coaching: in a clinician to a patient interaction, a clinician might seek to have all the answers to give to the patient, and a patient may look to gain those answers from that clinician. In health coaching, health coaches work with participants to help guide them towards understanding themselves and what's most appropriate for them to move forwards in their circumstances, whether it be recovering from physical injury or trauma within the military or not. So that's the kind of realm that our staff are working in within both the Battleback Centre and on the expedition. So there was that kind of specific ratio. Clearly, everybody spoke with everybody, but we had a sort of alignment of staff to specific participants, didn't we? I also want to talk about how the research actually goes on. So I'm having conversations and I'm not necessarily writing everything down at the same time. So a lot of it is about operating well within a capacity that you're comfortable with, I think, personally. So if you think that the work that you're doing, you've got to plow so much time and energy into providing that experience for your clients that you just don't have the cognitive space to be able to then introduce something else that you've got to think about, try to be operating well within your, not comfort zone as such, but well within your sort of capabilities to create more cognitive space for yourself to introduce something. So participants would ask me, like, they're so focused on dealing with everything that's going on because they're that environment is so alien to them. And this is why I genuinely think that we should stop taking researchers on expeditions and start upskilling mountaineers to do research in a mountainous environment. Because I genuinely think that the skills that I need to conduct the research work that I do were less hard fought and took less long to gain than the skills that I need to be in that environment as a mountaineer. So it's dead easy for me to just bang out a few notes at the end of the day when everybody else is still kind of packing and repacking the bag. So some of it is just down to the literal practicalities of how comfortable you are with that environment. We're now heading up, if we think about where we are literally on the actual expedition here, we're starting to head up to the mountain area. We've headed up through a number of valleys. Dave's going to now speak about that kind of summit push.
Now, one of the things not mentioned really in terms of the team is that we gave everybody responsibility. So although the leaders had all sorts of things they needed to think about, the participants also had responsibility, so that they felt really part of what was going off. They were a big part of the achievement of what we're doing. Some of those jobs that were given could be jobs that could be turned off and wouldn't put pressure on people. And then for other people that are coping well, you might give them additional jobs when we're walking into the mountain. Like, for example, here's one of the participants here, one of the more experienced. We had, out of the 13 people, 11 people with zero mountaineering experience and 2 that had some experience. And this is one of those that did, and we got him involved in the equipment. He was in charge of the equipment, and there he's giving a little presentation at base camp there about what we're going to need on the mountain. And we're now coming into sort of the mountain phase and the final part. And Mira itself, as a mountaineer, I'd heard about Mira for years, and lots of people talk about Mira being a fairly straightforward peak. Technically, it is fairly straightforward. The sort of mountaineering skills that you need, crampons and so on, aren't overly demanding. However, it's still a pretty tough mountain. It's 6,500 meters above sea level. And so as we pushed up from base camp, which was based at the nearest small village, up to our high camp, that was a hell of a day. And some of you may know John Gupta. He's pretty famous, 7 summits and so on, Everest guide and what have you. And he was there same time as us. He was about a day or 2 ahead of us. And John was coming down this day that we were going up, and he took me aside and he went, it's a bit chunkier than I thought it was going to be as a day. It's a big day out to get up to high camp and the top of the mountain. And that section there was something that people will remember. Getting up into the site of high camp there which was at 5,800 meters above sea level. And this night was beautiful, but absolutely horrible as well. Very windy, people struggling with the altitude and so on, but poised to go for the top. Now, in terms of the top, we'd ended up putting huge pressure on ourselves by saying we were going to stand on top of Mira Peak, 6,500 meters in view of Everest, 100 years to the day of the end of the First World War. I used to have long hair prior to making that decision, and had various sleepless nights, but here we were poised the day before that and to set out for the summit. And we set out for the summit in the early hours of the morning, and not everybody was there with us. We decided some people weren't acclimatizing as well as others, and some people needed an additional day to acclimatize. Some people had decided they'd already reached their summit, and even before we went, some people said they weren't going to be doing the mountain. The vast majority were going to attempt it, but different people had different summits on this, and it was tough. These are non-mountaineers on a 6,500 meter peak in the Himalayas, and on the way up we had all sorts of support in place with the leaders in the right places, the doctor in the right place, the Sirdar and the Sherpas and so on. But we did have a couple of people that had to turn back in the first stages of setting out for the summit, but we did get blessed with the most incredible sunrise in the early hours of the morning. It was just amazing as we kept plodding on up Mira. And one thing I found about Mira that made it tough was that it's at a weird angle. It's not a plodding angle. It's slightly more than that. So it's quite hard on the legs for many, many hours. But at 8 a.m. on 100 years to the day after the end of the First World War, we managed to reach the top of Mira Peak. And it was, I mean, you don't get many summits like that, do you? It's absolutely phenomenal scenery. It really was. And pretty emotional moment. I was emotional about getting there for sure, and what we'd gone through, but there were lots of people there on that summit team that were there for different reasons, and remember, getting handed a hip flask on the summit, and one of the lads said to me, can you just have a slug of this to remember my mate that died in Afghanistan, and you're having 2 minutes silence on the top of the mountain and properly really thinking about, we've got guys there who've all been to Afghanistan and so on, and we're encapsulating everything for the British Legion here. I was thinking of my granddad that had been in Second World War, in jungle and so on. So it was a really, really incredibly powerful moment, but very, 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 we were very happy, as you can imagine. And it really was very special. And somewhere behind somebody's head there, you can see the pyramid of Everest. And when you stood on the top of Mira Peak, you can see 6 of the 8,000 meter peaks. It's a phenomenal place to go. I really recommend it.
It's a good idea, that wasn't it, Dave? Now you turn a corner now. You turn a corner physically and cognitively. You're no longer going out from home. You've arrived at bingo, and now you're going back. So there's a real shift in thought process, conversation, and it's my job to try and figure out
You're in the wrong one.
how do you explain that experience of an individual. How do you question about that experience of that individual? Because it's this difficulty, it's this challenge, it's that summit that I'm tasked with evidencing to feed that information back to funders, to future funders, to people who need convincing, to promote and engage in outdoor adventurous activities with the intention of providing meaningful experience with people. This individual explained that they learned more from not summiting. He wasn't just taking a rest and then carrying on. I think it wasn't the moment that he turned around and went back. Each individual had a totally different mindset and outlook about what they felt this experience could do for them and how they might approach it. So some of them were just looking in every square inch of the experience of how can I use this to better myself. Some people just tipped up and said, that sounds fun. Don't think it's going to change my life, but let's see if I can go on that do. They spoke about how failing to summit allowed them a greater opportunity to learn and gain for themselves. I'm going to give you an example of a bit of a journey, a story of an individual's journey. But you'll be pleased to hear there's loads more to read. We recently published a longitudinal understanding of this experience 18 months after the participants had taken part in the expedition, in a special edition of the Journal of the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. They were looking at performance in extreme environments. And so I often think of blood tests, cortisol, so on and so forth, when you think of that. One thing that they were interested in was being a participant in extreme environments. So that was a very perfect niche journal for that work to go in. But we consider it to be unparalleled in the literature in terms of the longitudinal research that's gone on with it. Coming back to where I was. So as I say, we've turned that cognitive corner now, and we're now returning back to base camp. We're returning back to life, and now we have the time for reflection. and for the participants to reflect on their experiences with me over the months and years of this 5-year research project. I'd like to speak with you now a little bit about an individual's journey. Speaking about their life 12 months before the expedition, I wasn't doing a lot. I was a pretty negative person back then. I was in therapy and I was trying to juggle different medications. This participant at that time was unable to work in their current job role within the medical practice. 2 weeks prior to going on the expedition, so even before they've gone to Nepal, they've had a year's worth of involvement in training experiences, launch events, and so on and so forth. So people gained a huge amount beforehand, but it also puts a lot of pressure on them. One of the participants spoke about how they were so paranoid that something was going to happen that meant that they couldn't go, whether it was their behavior, whether it was some external thing that they had no control over. They were terrified that something was going to happen that meant that they weren't going to be able to go. So you've got to question, well, how do we manage that for that individual? Because we don't want to increase anxieties for people. 2 weeks prior to the expedition, I was in a better place, but I was still not able to work. I'd gone back to work for a few months, but then I had gotten ill again and been taken out. However, I'd been feeling a lot more positive. Then during the expedition, after a day ascending to around 5,500 meters on the glacier for the very first time, I thought I was scared at going back to work, but what the hell? That was way worse. I would much rather be dumped back in an A&E after 2 years of being away from it, but now I would have more control over it. I'm not sure how true that is, but it does stack up in my mind. So they're already thinking about, has what's just gone on there altered my perspective, so that actually the thing that I thought was the scariest environment that I could consider, going back and being a functioning doctor in a hospital where everything's going on around me, is that no longer the scariest thing that I can consider? They spoke about how it was stressful but safe. We've spoken a little bit about risk today. They spoke about how it was committing. There was that perception of danger and commitment and so on and so forth, but they were safe. They felt comfortable in the position that they were in terms of the people that they were with. 6 months after the expedition, they tell me that they are now back at work on a graduated return to work program, 3 days a week. This participant had been told to seek employment outside of medicine, since their attempts to return to that environment had been so unsuccessful. They said, I'd been spending about 1.5 years trying to think of anything else that I wanted to do apart from going back to medicine. I then realized that I didn't have anything else that I wanted to do. I don't know. I really just felt like I needed to get my life back together. So then it's really important for me to understand attribution. So would this person, given time, have been able to return to work, and given that a third go, and it not go wrong, as to use their words, or did their involvement in the expedition play any part in it? They don't believe. They say that I don't believe in all or nothing. I'd have to go with partly responsible. Again, we don't claim that we wave magic wands and fix people, and then everything in their life is hunky-dory and rosy from that point forwards. I don't know if I would have ended up back at work. I just don't know. I mean, maybe something else could have been. There could be time. But all I know is that all the time before that, it never really got me anywhere. So it certainly didn't have an impact. Spoken again with this person very recently, and their opinion of that statement is getting stronger and stronger over time. They said that they still stand by that statement, that heading up to 5,500 meters at the Mera was pivotal in their ability to return to work as a functioning member of the medical profession. We now need to consider. Sorry, that means a lot to me. It means an awful lot to me when we hear those tales, and this is what we have evidenced within the research. We'd like you all to go and engage with it and understand what it meant to each of those individuals, because we couldn't quantify success, because one person who fails the summit claims that they've gained more from it. Other people, we know full well that if they hadn't have summited, they wouldn't have had that belief. So understanding what success means to your clients, your beneficiaries, I think is another takeaway point. There's a few left to go there, but I'll let you whiz it on.
Conscious of time, I think that what Chris has just gone through there highlights the detail of what sort of came out this expedition. So hopefully you've taken a few little nuggets away with you there in terms of planning an expedition of this type. I'd just like to say, has anybody got any questions? Have we got time for